Welcome to our CLR Roundtable. We have started this session, or this series, to focus on monthly topics related to starting and implementing a CLR initiative at your campus. This month's topic is going to be focused on how a CLR record contributes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have a series of great panelists here to help share their story. I'm Kelly Hoyland with IMS Global, here as your host of the event. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Like I said, feel free to use the chat for any questions that you may have later on. We will have time for questions and answers. If you're more comfortable unmuting yourself and asking your question verbally, we can do that as well. Or if you want to put your question in the chat as we go, we will get to those later in the session. So this event is monthly. The events, any previous events have been recorded and posted, just like this one. So feel free to visit that event page at any point. Before we start, I'm going to do a quick poll just to see who is in our audience today, what kind of background you come from, and where you're at with your CLR initiative. So if you could take just a quick second and complete that poll. That way we kind of have an idea of who is here and we can tailor our session to fit. While you're doing that poll, I'll just go ahead and introduce our panelists today. So today, Tom Green, the director, the associate executive director at AACRAO, is serving as our moderator for this panel today. And then our panelists consist of Sherri Braxton, the senior director of instructional technology at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Natasha Jankowski, who's the executive director and research associate and an associate professor at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes and Assessment. And I apologize, I should have practiced your titles. And then lastly, we have Zander Taylor, who is the assistant registrar from Elon University. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'll end the poll and I'll share the results just quick so you can see who is in the audience today. So it looks like we have a mix of academic, registrars, and IT professionals today. Most are in the process, planning, and investigation stages of their CLR initiatives. A few of you have a platform already selected, but most of you are still in the process of looking for a solution. So at this point, I will turn the session over to Tom Green. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I think the key for us is to have shorter titles. That would make it a lot easier as well. So thanks everyone for joining us today. This is a very timely and important session that we're having. About 5 years ago, AACRAO was in the process of thinking about something called the extended transcript. And that was a conversation really about how technology was impacting the field of student records and brainstorming possibilities and ideas. And from that emerged over time this notion of a comprehensive learner record. And along the way, we also picked up important partners, NASPA in student affairs and NILOA in learning outcomes and assessment. And we also had important partners that came from our institutions. And so two of those institutional participants are here today, and Natasha Jankowski from NILOA is here today as well. And so that really got us started along this path. But very early on, as we were having these conversations, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion was an important part. We were hoping that this might become another tool to help democratize higher education, to really level the playing field for so many people. As far back as higher education goes, it's had inequities. It's been an unequal system. And whether it's been by gender, by nationality, by skin color, higher education's history has been one of excluding people. And over time, we've been working to lower those barriers, to remove those barriers, to make it a more equal system. And we're not there yet, but we're continuing to look for tools that will help us do that. So AACRAO, which is the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, has about 11,000 members, mostly in the United States. Most colleges and universities are members of the association. And we have some fundamental pillars about diversity, equity, and inclusion that are very important to us. So First of all, it's one of our strategic initiatives. It's one of the pillars of our strategic plan. But we also have a lot of evidence in the actions that we take. We have caucuses around historically underrepresented groups, ways that our members can come together and speak with one another and speak with like-minded individuals about how we can more intentionally lower the barriers, remove the barriers, and be more inclusive and representative in higher education, both for students, but also in our administration. AACRAO also supports, certain events, certain movements, certain peaceful demonstrations. We closed our office for a day during the March on Washington in DC, and we participated. We marched to show our support. And we also are taking the day off tomorrow in support of voting and putting out, a big call for people to really be active and vote. So we want to just not show words or put things into a statement, but we want to really show our support actively. We have a lot of resources. We have a website on our association page, a signature initiative around Black Lives Matter with education resources, videos, et cetera, for people to learn more about the history of race in America, especially American society, and then some resources how people can interact with those and educate themselves or others just to be better informed about this and better participants in that. We also do policy work about inclusion. We just did a large scale study on gender and gender identity, and we put out guidance on that. And we're also working with the federal government on what that means for things like iPads and reporting. And then we also make sure that when we have authors who write papers, or if you attend one of our meetings, you will see that we work very hard to make sure that the people who are writing, the people who are on editorial boards, the people who are speaking, the people who are keynoting, facilitating, really represent not only the higher education diversity we already have, but the diversity we want to have in the future. So we're very dedicated to those things as an association. And Kelly, on the next slide, we just have a few things to highlight that we do have core competencies and proficiencies for our professions that we represent. And within that are statements about the core competency that you have to have in really understanding and promoting diversity and inclusion with this. So these I won't read those to you, and you can find them on our website as well. So just wanted to begin with a little bit of perspective about how the CLR is important to us as an association, because diversity, equity, inclusion is important to us, and the CLR work is not just a way to digitize records. It's a way that we hope is helping students get a different look as they go to maybe higher education, further education, where they go to work. How does this record help them? So I'm going to ask Natasha next to talk a little bit about assessment, and then we're going to hear from some of our practitioners, and they can show you some of the work they're doing that's very much in line with this idea. Great, Natasha?
Thanks so much, Tom. And hi, everyone. You get a break from slides. So I will also be putting in a couple links to things that I'm going to talk about. But really, for us as the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, which if you are not familiar, NILOA is really a go-to online resource for all things assessment for colleges and universities. So we look nationally at how our institutions assessing student learning, in what ways, how are they documenting the evidence that students are able to demonstrate what they know and can do, which makes perfect sense to be part of a comprehensive learner record conversation, because it's the evidence that then goes into the record to sort of support our assertions. So NILOA is always excited to have any kind of conversation about assessment in that space. And it also means we have to think about, where does that learning take place? Where do we capture and document that learning occurred? And then how do we get that into this record so that we can actually have a fulsome picture of the ways and places that our students learn and have demonstrated and showed that learning. So when we think about the relationship between a comprehensive learner record and diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is a huge opportunity to open our space of where we take evidence that you know as a student to do something. So right now, in our current sort of structures, most institutions will say you have to do it in a particular way in front of me as a faculty member at this time and place, and regardless of what's going on in your life, or if you work a job where you're showing it, or if you've shown that you have this skill set and knowledge in a variety of other ways, that doesn't count. And it's sort of lopsided power structure in those dynamics. And so by going into a comprehensive learner record conversation, we can actually have a space to have student agency play a greater role and to broaden the evidence that we put forward that a student knows and can do something, because it becomes about show me you can do this from a wide variety of places. It's not limiting based on our systems what goes into that evidence. So if I'm a student and I'm working, and that's where I'm really applying my knowledge and skills, and where I think that I am the best in my demonstration of showing quantitative reasoning skills, let's say, I have the option to put that forward to show that I have demonstrated and met a learning outcome of interest. And if we really are an assessment about learning outcomes and attainment of that, regardless of the path you took, then the comprehensive learner record fits perfectly into what we should be thinking about. So if you're interested in any conversations around equity and assessment, I do want to throw a couple links into chat for you, and opening that space of how do we in assessment, which has normally been a field that's very, we all must do it in the same way, and we have objective principles of research and science that we must follow. Post-positivism is reigns the day. Thinking about where does equity fit in relation to that? Because if we make space for equity in our assessment, we make space for equity in our comprehensive learner records. The other space where a comprehensive learner record really partners nicely with that diversity, equity, inclusion is making clear to our students what they know and can do. Oftentimes our assessment process is for our programs, it's for us. We see the data and the student doesn't know, you just demonstrated mastery on this. You've been assessed on the knowledge and skills that you have on these ways. They're getting through a course, they're getting through a learning experience. Maybe they're participating in a co-curricular opportunity, and that process of that we're actually assessing if you can do something is not transparent or put forward. So by actually mapping all of these spaces and places, it clearly shows the value of our co-curriculum. It clearly shows this different support structures where people can engage in learning in multiple ways, but it also makes it clear to our students. So our students can say, I know I can do this because, and here's the evidence. I know when I was asked to do this task, it was for these reasons. And I know that happened here. And I can also explain to others the value and the worth of my education and the opportunities that I participated in, because it's connected to my learning. It's not just about getting through the experience, but it's about really thinking about that documented learning of our experience. So if you're interested in talking more about comprehensive learner records to any institutional partners that you might have, thinking about how to map learning, I'm going to give you a couple more links. You can refer to me as like the link lady from here on out. I apologize, I have no slides for you, but I would give you links. The first one is a paper that's targeted for a higher education audience on really thinking about the role of a comprehensive learner record and in some of these issues of documenting our learning for our students so that I'm aware, you're aware, but also as an institution, we can see, are there certain spaces where our students are learning much better in an alternative environment than we would normally traditionally think? And is there reasons why we're forcing learning to occur in these spaces? Or do we need to provide those as regular options in our advising? And so we can actually rethink our institutional structures, some of those barriers that Tom had talked about what we put in the way for students to get to their learning, by actually seeing where students can show their learning and highlight in the best manner. Then the other link that I will toss in here for you as well is a piece targeted for student affairs on how to think about mapping that learning, and also what might some of that evidence be in the form of those assignments and those tasks that you could put into a comprehensive learner record. So it really is, to sort of sum this up, a reimagining and a rethinking of that this allows us a space to say, if our students are coming here to learn, we are learning environments. And especially in light of COVID, where students learn, how they learn, what that learning looks like is incredibly different. A comprehensive learner record allows us that flexibility and adaptability to put forward those different types of evidence and see, does it meet the learning that we're looking for? And it might look like something we weren't expecting, but if it's mastery of that interest, then it should count. So for an assessment person, it really brings us back to the heart of why we do what we do in assessment. So thank you so much for that. And I'll turn it back to Tom.
Great. Thanks, Natasha. So as we began this back in 2015, one of the very early leaders in this work was Elon University. And they were already well ahead of a lot of other folks in thinking about the possibilities of how learning could be represented in a digital form. And so very pleased to have Zander Taylor with us today to talk a little bit about the work that Elon has done. Zander?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I guess to start everything off, thank you for being here at the webinar and listening to just the information that we have on the comprehensive learner record and everything. And just a little bit about myself. I started out as a student at Elon University in 2012, graduated in 2016. I've been in higher education ever since. So I've had the perspective of the student side as well as the administration side when it comes to being exposed to the comprehensive learner record, the experiential learning that Elon has, and then ultimately how we're managing it on the back end and how we inform students. It's an institutional process that needs to be really rich and embedded into the institutional culture, but nevertheless, it is possible to have an institutional culture that is focused on comprehensive learner record, like those types of aspects and everything. So to give a little bit of information, Elon University is a medium-sized private institution in central North Carolina that has an emphasis on experiential and engaged learning. All students are required to participate in at least 2 Elon experiences, which are based in AACNU's high impact practices of things such as study abroad, undergraduate research, internships, the things like that. And so because we originally we've had that requirement since 1993, that we've had it built into the institutional culture of students participating in it, that we were fortunate enough that when we were actually trying to build a record from this, that the infrastructure was more or less kind of already set for us, that when we eventually modified our student information systems and our LMS systems to really hone in and develop these records, then we were able to produce a proof of concept pretty quickly. We were very fortunate enough to do that. And then our role since joining the CLR pilot, since AACRAO, has really been a guiding force for a lot of institutions, that we believe that we're very open source and we want to provide as much information to other institutions, not just hold it as kind of this proprietary secret and everything like that. And so on the next slide, along with all of the work that we're doing with AACRAO and all of these different webinars and work groups and everything, is that we do a lot of extensive research with our employers and students, asking them about how they view these types of documents. Is it really meaningful, or is this kind of just another document that kind of gets thrown into the mix and it's hard to really decipher what's going on? And so based on the work that we've done so far, though I will say that I'll be candid saying that there are some limitations to the research that we've done with employers. A large amount of the evidence that we've found is that CLRs and these different experiential transcripts, they do present the student in a different way. It provides more information, more useful information from an employment standpoint. When we were doing our research, we found the credentialing has a really interesting history when it comes to how employers use diplomas and credentials as sort of a proxy for they spent 2 or 4 years or a certain number of years to be able to attain a degree. And it wasn't so much the true learning outcomes that were developed from it, but it was just a proxy for you persisted through the degree, you continued to work each and every year building on what you've learned, and then you ultimately have this finishing product. And so originally, historically, that has been viewed as worthy of employment and everything. But I think that very recently, just within the 21st century, that that paradigm has shifted a lot, both from like industries like the tech industry, where you don't necessarily need to have that 4-year credential to be able to work in a fast-paced environment, that a lot of those paradigms are coming into question right now. And I think that those are very valuable, very necessary questions for us as institutions to really have. And so I think that's where that the CLR really comes into play right now. Do CLRs hold value in the job market and the employment standpoint? And on the last point from this survey is that, and this was back in 2017, that visual transcripts, or the record that Elon has, employers were reluctant to be able to provide just a full force agreement that this was going to change the way that we were going to be employing new graduates, that people were reluctant to viewing this as just a complete game changer and everything. But I think that there is a lot of positive information when you combine this with your work history, or when you couple this record with your internship experience, your network, all those different things, that it does provide a positive outcome for our students. If you go to the next slide. We were also asking our employers, what's the type of information that we want to embed in our record? Because we didn't want to just create the comprehensive learner record to just be another extension of the academic transcript. The academic transcript is very valuable information about a student's course history that is very valuable for things such as graduate students, or even some employers that are looking for certain skills. But it's a static document that only provides so much information, that we didn't want to just make the comprehensive learner record just another transcript, basically. It needs to be more dynamic. It needs to provide more information. And so when we were asking our employers what type of information they wanted that richer experience on what type of leadership or internship experiences did they have. Sort of to Natasha's point on what are the competencies and learning outcomes that if you were to get information about a student's major or their degree program, then you can really drill down into the granular experiences, courses, the outcomes that a student can get. That's the type of power that this record can hold if it's done properly. And next slide, please. So both with this being an externally facing document for our third party, or rather our stakeholders, the people that rely on the higher education system when it comes to employment and everything else like that. This is also an internal document, or this is an internal way for Elon to consider our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals through our strategic plans, through our goals and institution for educating our students, that we eventually built up our experiences to have a robust data set to be able to mine and find some of those correlations or associations between the different experiences. And so the next two slides, this one specifically, we were looking at, if we could actually go back that one, there we go. This slide is showing the 5 experiences that we capture in our experiential learning requirements and how each of them stacks up. And so this information is from the 2016 graduating class. So all of these students did graduate. So these are pretty high engagement levels, from like 60% of our students are participating in internships. But you can see some of the disparities between primarily white students versus minority students. I would also like to add that Elon is a primarily white institution, that Elon, I will be candid that Elon is shifting its focus a lot more to how we are managing or how we're addressing the diversity, equity, and inclusion question that's been posed, especially this past year. Our strategic plan has made a lot of changes recently as a result of that. But the comprehensive learner record provides a robust data set for us to ask questions about our engagement on campuses, about what kind of students are participating in internships. We also have a 100% access goal for study abroad and global engagement. And so we see that's kind of just the notable one, that primarily minority students have less access or participate less in study abroad compared to white students. And so we can really ask questions about, why is that occurring? Is that occurring because of the major and the action, the programs that they're participating in, or is there are underlying problems of a student's lifestyle, that they are a full-time worker, and so they don't have the opportunity to go off to a study abroad experience and leave their families for an extended period of time, that there are serious livelihood questions that we need to ask when it comes to that. And so this sort of unearths and kind of brings to light some of the underlying questions that we might have, but we have some serious data behind it. And next slide, please. We're also able to look at some of the time series data that this graph just kind of shows some basic information of all of our 2016 graduates who all participated in their Elon experiences. But we see that early on, students from minority populations participate less in their first 2 years compared to white students. That there's some serious consideration that it's because that our white students that come from more affluent backgrounds have better preparation and are more able to navigate the higher education experience, and so they participate earlier in their college experience with experiential learning from their internships or service learning. And so eventually all students get to the final goal, but I would question an institution to be, how can institutions engage minority students earlier in the process, whether it's creating new programs, whether it's new initiatives on engaging students earlier, that also has ramifications of retention and better outcomes possibly. So those are some of the internal questions that impact our strategic planning and our institutional culture here at Elon.
Great, thanks, Zander. I think we're going to have lots of questions popping up through the chat here as we move through this. So I think we'll want to engage in some of that. I think interesting data, and I think data leads to questions and discussion. And so we're looking forward to that as we get to that point in this webinar today. But I wanted to invite Sherri Braxton to talk next. Sherri represents the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and they are a more recent participant in the project. So they've come into this project later in the process, and they are racing along in developing their CLR. And so she's going to tell us about that. Sherri?
Sure, absolutely. And just quickly, University of Maryland, Baltimore County is one of 12 schools in the system of Maryland, roughly 13,000 students, population of around 38,000. 38% of those are white students. So the majority of our population is minority, a part of some minority group. And so the work we're doing for our comprehensive learner record is focusing around a collaboration with employers and higher ed to help to increase the number of students or candidates, potential candidates to work in the Washington, Baltimore, Richmond corridor. And so next slide, and the focus here is on not our STEM majors, but those non-technical majors who are studying at the institution to help them prepare to work in these environments. So next slide, please. So we're working with a group called the Greater Washington Partnership, and within them, there's this Capital CoLab. The Capital CoLab consists of some of your high-end employers like Amazon, Northrop Grumman, Under Armour, and they're working in conjunction with institutions like UMBC, Johns Hopkins, George Mason, Howard University, to help prepare more students or candidates, I'll say, but I say students because that's who we're working with, but candidates for these technical jobs, and so that they have some digital competency to be able to step into these digital tech jobs that they expect to be happening over the next 5 years. And I think it's like they're anticipating more than 130 digital tech jobs over the next 5 years. So obviously we need to increase the pipeline to be able to support that. And while we are known at UMBC for our STEM majors, what we really want to do is reach those non-STEM majors and help them to get those digital tech skills so that they can have access to these types of opportunities in these companies. And so with that, next slide. So they've defined a credential called the Digital Generalist credential, and there are 6 competency areas, and you see them here on the screen, from data and analytics to data ethics and data security and everything in between. And we know that, as I said, we have our humanities students, and they may not take courses that will get them, entry or exposure to these types of competencies, but they do have lots of skills that can apply to those kinds of companies that I spoke about. So next slide. So part of the work of the higher ed and employers that are part of this collaboration was to develop the framework that defined what those skills, those competency skills and abilities that these students would need to have to come into their environments and be able to work effectively. And so this is not an eye chart, but you can get an idea that under each of the 6 competencies, there are knowledge, skills, and abilities that they would like for our students to come with. And so next slide, in order to do that and not make students change their majors, we decided to develop some open modules. Some of you may be familiar with the open platform called edX. The system of Maryland has a system branded version of it called USMX. And so we've developed some modules using courses that we teach at our institution and extracting that content so that the students can take these standalone modules and gain the competencies that these employers have identified as important in order to be able to work effectively in their institutions. So what you see represented on the next slide is really showing how what we've done is we've broken out the credential to those 6 competencies, and we're going to award the students a badge associated with those competencies as they progress through the program. Now, what's great about this is that students can use combinations of meeting these competencies. They can take, for example, the Prob Stats competency. Maybe they've already had a Prob Stats course. So that one's already, they will already automatically be awarded that particular badge through our CLR. And then maybe they need to take 4 or 5 of the other standalone modules that they can do over the course of several months, rather than having, to take courses that may take an entire term. They could complete these badges at a quicker pace, and then be able to stack to this larger credential that the Greater Washington Partnership is endorsing, and it is then making known to their employers that, hey, we have students who have completed these different competency areas, have demonstrated the skills that you've said are important, and are ready to join your workforce. So next slide. So we're using AEFIS for our comprehensive learner record. AEFIS, it's this assessment management platform, has a great, robust suite of tools. In order to accomplish the work we're doing for our CLR, we need the curriculum mapping tool, and Natasha's spoken eloquently about what's so important about mapping those outcomes and the assessments that are used to measure whether the students have reached a certain level of competency. So that's what we get from the outcomes assessment and evidence collection. And then the outcomes transcript, which really is where the CLR is represented. So next slide. And so as we use AEFIS to represent the CLR, we're showing mastery as they move through the different competencies that you saw on the previous slides. But what I want to say on the next slide is very important, is to understand that the work that has to go to doing this. And so the curriculum mapping is a key part of this. we all know that lots of different institutions have different learning frameworks that are used. So we've defined the learning framework around the Greater Washington Partnership. These are our general education learning outcomes. So our courses and our programs are mapped to these. And then you have accreditation learning frameworks, right? Like ABET. And so part of the work that has to be done is to do this curriculum mapping so you can see where these competency, skills, and abilities are met and demonstrated, and where the evidence can be found within those courses. And this is an intensive process. But what you end up with is exactly what Natasha said, a very transparent view for students to see where they're gaining certain skills and what courses, where their gaps are, and where they need to work to strengthen their particular skill set. So next slide. So I just show this this slide because we've also got other competencies we've been working on. We've been doing badging since 2015. One of the badging initiatives through the system of Maryland is the badging for essential skills and transitions, say that 5 times fast, which is based on the 21st century skills that NACE has identified. You know, those soft, we call them soft skills, but what we know is that they're critical to success in the workplace. And so this is yet another framework that was built on AACNU value rubrics and the NACE work that we can again map in our curriculum and demonstrate and show where students are demonstrating the mastery of these skills, both in curricular and co-curricular activities. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And so the next slide really shows what we've been doing since 2015 at UMBC when it comes to badges. So we're badging students in curricular work and their co-curricular work if they have learning experiences through their jobs on campus, like our new media studio, where students learn to be camera operators and work on our ESPN broadcast. All of these different competencies are captured. And what we have now with our CLR is a way for students to be able to communicate effectively where they've gathered and acquired these skills. And then again, it also shows them where they have areas of growth and possible broadening of skills that they could do as they continue through their learning journey. So next slide. So where we are now is we're finishing up working with AEFIS on our pilot for the CLR pilot we're working through. You see our under construction sign, and over the next month, we're going to be running students through these modules so that we can demonstrate what that CLR is going to look like to them on the other end. Next slide.
Great. Thank you very much, Zander and Sherri. Wonderful. And Natasha as well for the demonstrations there. I want to, I'm going to copy into a book, and I'm going to hold it up on camera here so you can hopefully see it. This is another good reference, Beyond the College Transcript by Pam Bowers at South Carolina. South Carolina was one of the early phase 1 schools in our project. And similar to Elon, they developed this rich data bank of student participation information, which I think is one of the interesting threads that's weaving through here. If you don't know where your students are engaged or not engaged, you can't even begin to really investigate the why. So I wanted to come back to that point that Elijah was raising here, which is about high impact practices and who participates, who doesn't participate. Do we know why? Do we know why this is happening? I think, you know, there's a quantitative answer to it, which is that we know there's intersectionality around students of color, income, you know, those type of things, which can, you know, it's kind of an A plus B equals C. We're making this line of logic along to say that since this is true and that is true, this might be true or, you know, must be true on the other end, which I think Natasha had put out there as well. That, you know, kind of reinforces the, you know, the idea that, you know, these students are participating because. I think the qualitative answer for it, though, is less known. It's the why. Why are students perhaps less likely to participate? Are we making assumptions about their participation or lack thereof that are either, right, they're either borne out by the research or not borne out by the research? I think that's an interesting discussion topic. So I didn't know if any of our panelists wanted to engage a little bit more with that, Natasha?
Yes, I would love to, because I think when we talk about comprehensive learner record and its potential to really be a tool for equity, there's this one of the space that we need to watch out for in this work is that we do not force behavior norms on our students of color to be more like our white students, to say engage in these things, do this stuff because they have this on their record, instead of saying, where do our students of color learn? Where do they show this that we haven't captured in our structures, that we never even looked at or looked to? And that might be on-campus employment. That might be something I'm doing at home. That might be my community. That might be something I'm engaged at elsewhere. And that we have not provided that space in our research, in our records, to say, to go to our students to say, put forward, what evidence would you put forward of where you do this? And inviting them to be an active partner in that, to then say, okay, instead of saying, go participate in this activity, how do I get more of you to add more to your already full plate? Actually elevate up the spaces and places where we do that learning. And so I think there's a great opportunity in this data process when we think about evidence and where that evidence is coming from to really reimagine and understand where our students of color are demonstrating their learning in ways that we just have blinders on because structurally we have built it not around those. And we have put boundaries around what culture comes in and what culture goes out, and what you need to do and where learning happens, let alone just between academic affairs and student affairs, right? We have a lot of things that we do not allow into this space. But with a comprehensive learner record, if we really take it to be that it is comprehensive, that is a holistic view of our student as a learner, and that transference of knowledge is that hard part that we all want to have happen. Apply it here, apply it there, know that you did it here, and that metacognition awareness of I learned it, we can flip this whole model on its head and to really allow this space for our students to be empowered to bring it forward. Now, we mess it up immediately if we say, oh, that doesn't count, and oh, that's not education, and oh, that's not the wrong level, because we then just reinforce to our students when we say, show me, tell us, you're a part, that they're not really, that it's still not right. That's the not right type of evidence. So I think there's to Tom's point about data adds more questions and really getting into it, there's a wonderful opportunity to really engage in game changer diversity, equity, inclusion conversations around comprehensive learner records. But it is also equally a tipping point to reinforce and add more barriers and more things that you have to do to get this on your record. And some other student has it, now you don't, and to further move goalposts for our students of color. So finding which one we want to do and where the role of our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts fits in our comprehensive learner record, I think is our task looking forward. But it could be so powerful in this space.
And Natasha, that also speaks to the type of people who are in charge of these initiatives, right? This is why you need a diverse workforce, because when you only have the same kind of people who are the ones deciding what these evidence, strategies are of acquiring these skills, then you don't really get that robust picture. So it really goes beyond just what the students gain from this. It's really a cultural shift that institutions have to take about who's in charge of identifying these assessments of competency, right? So it's a
yes.
Oh, I love that, Sherri, and it speaks to one of those things that I say sometimes is that we have to remember that those of us who wound up in higher education working in it did so because college went well for us, right? At some level, we were successful at this. And it becomes our own echo chamber of talking to ourselves about the things that work because they worked for us. And so we really need to make sure we're engaging those students for whom college is not working well, and understand that and ask those questions. What is failing, and what do we need to do to make it better? And there are some programs that are really doing that well. And I want to call out Cal State Dominguez Hills. They had a program, 6 or 7 years ago that they started, where they brought in students from, they were the students who were, according to standard measures, right, were the least prepared. They were students from low income households in South Central LA. They were students of color, right? They were commuting on all kinds of ways to get to campus, 3 buses sometimes to get to campus. And they brought them in and they retained at 98% from freshman to sophomore year, and they graduated at almost 70%. And so, you can do it. There are ways, but if you aren't right? If you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to get the outcomes. And data tracking in that as well, in their project, was a huge part of understanding what was working, what was not working, that experience. I do want to call out one other thing as a resource that I thought was really interesting. When we began this project, we recognized that the United Kingdom had been several years ahead in trying to create an other type of record, the Higher Education Achievement Record, or the HEAR. And we went over and talked with different schools about their approaches to it, what was working, what was not working. And this issue of participation of underrepresented students really was, I mean, they were highly aware of this, and they were, some places were trying to really be innovative with that. And one of them was Kingston University, which is in the suburbs of London, but they were a former polytechnic, and their reputation was for working students, older students, students of color. They had huge numbers of those students in their university, and they were trying to do these participation type of things. And what they did was they constructed these multiple pathways to achievement. So that if you were a working mom with, kids at home, and you had a job and you're trying to get your degree, there were absolutely equal pathways that you could take in order to achieve the badges that they had set out in these things. It was a really interesting way of looking at it and trying to solve the problem creatively. The other thing I wanted to think about today was, does this impact hiring, right? How can this impact hiring? And so we need to find ways in which we can transmit this as data. And as data is consumed, depending upon who's writing the algorithms at the other end, this can be a way that students become not stamped with the institution they graduated from, perhaps, or who they look, right, who they are, what their last name is, those kind of biases that come into the hiring process. Our hope is that at some point we can mitigate that a little bit by having a data stream. And that's where the standard for the CLR comes in and is really important, in that we want these not to be sent as PDF documents, but we want them to be sent as data files so that machines can consume them, and hiring managers can then evaluate who's matched for the job based upon the match between the data and the job requirements, because we know that that's an issue in hiring. If I'm more familiar with UMBC than I am with Elon, I'm likely to have an evaluative opinion on that, right? And that may be good or bad, but I'm going to have more of an opinion, more of a basis to make an opinion on that. If I see a student's last name, I may get thoughts about who that student may be in this, or their entire name. I might get thoughts about who it might be, and might make biased assumptions about that person based upon those data. So we're trying to work at ways to make these available as data streams. And IMS Global's work with the CLR standard has been really helpful in that. AACRAO and NASPA have been involved in evaluating that, but also now we're involved with an implementation guide. We're hoping we can get this more broadly structured across higher education to be able to exchange them as data files. So just a little bit of that. Wanted to ask if there were other questions or comments from those in the audience who are participating in this, whether you'd like to put them in chat or whether you'd like to unmute and ask a question of any of the panelists today. Please go ahead.
I'm going to jump in while you're thinking of your question. So consider this your stall time to get your question worded out or typed or figure out where the unmute button is. But I want to pick up on something that Sherri had started to talk about in that relationship between these records and employment, and Tom's point that we do have a lot of students that self-select out of talent pools because they are unaware that they have the knowledge and skills for the job as it is. And so if I'm an employer, I might not find value in the record itself or that I can drill down on all of this, but I do find incredible amounts of value in the fact that I can actually find applicants, that I can find the talent pool that I need, and that my talent pool could be diverse in the ways that I need for my my work. And so while we have all of these employers that are like, I'm looking for people, I cannot find the people I want, we are producing students who go, oh, that I can't do that, who are unaware that they have those knowledge and skills. And so part of what this transparency piece of a comprehensive learner record does is it tells a student, this is what you know and can do, and things that look like this and things that sound like that are all stuff that you can apply for, that you have this skill set, you have that knowledge, go forth and do it, and actually get into being part of that talent pool. And so I think that's another added bonus for both our students and our workforce, and also thinking about the transferable nature of those skills. So I am not bound to my degree title, but I can do all of these things. And so now I'm thinking broader about shifting. And as we look at how students are going to have to be changing careers, changing directions, retooling, knowing what gap I need to fill to get into some employment opportunity, having that foundational basis of I already know what I know and can do, and I'm used to looking at that in my education, only empowers them to do that more as they advance.
Natasha, that's great. And I just want to follow up on that, because the best initiative from the system really started because employers from, who hire our students were saying, we get these students, they come in the interview, we ask them basic question like, give me an example where you showed leadership, and they couldn't answer it. And so it's something very basic like that. Well, we know they're doing it. They're doing it in class and assignment. They're doing it in social organizations. They're doing it in sports. They're doing it in all kinds of co-curricular, but they couldn't demonstrate or express that. And so that need to unpack for them what they're learning as part of their degree into these competencies is key. And so again, as you're saying, because of that transparency that it gives to them and to employers, when you start to look at it based on what I can do, what I know, what I can demonstrate, and regardless of where I picked up the skill, I can apply it to what you want me to do as an employee. That's really what we need to prepare our students to be able to do and explain.
I really like those comments, and it made me think so much of the gender imbalance between people feeling qualified for a job. We know that women are less likely to read a job description and say, I can do that, than men. And I'm going to get the percentages wrong here, but it's something like if men see 50% that they can do, they'd apply for the job. And with women, it was like 80 or 90%. They had to feel like they had the qualifications to do it before they would apply for the job. And so, those kind of imbalances are things that can help. The CLR should be able to help people understand you do have the skills and abilities. And I really like that part too about the title of my degree, because we know that there's a lot of thinking that if I want to hire someone to do this job, they have to have a degree in X. And we also know that's not true, right? And we're probably all representatives of that on this call, that we have a degree in something that we're not doing today. And that's always been true of degrees in higher education, that there's a high degree of transferability, but we haven't been able to really express it very well by being able to show what those transferable skills are, those career-ready skills. Sherri, I like you called them the soft skills from NACE. Those career essential skills that we teach in college, we don't do a great job of telling anybody about them. Our students, ourselves, employers, but we do it all the time, and we assess them all the time. So this is a way we hope that is making that more explicit and helping students and others realize it.
This also really fits into that diversity, equity, inclusion lens, because with a comprehensive learner record, if our students are mobile, if they step in and step out of the stream of their education, they have something to show for it. Right now, if I'm on a degree program and I don't complete that degree, I don't get anything for the time that I've been there. I have nothing to show for the time that I'm there. But if I have a comprehensive learner record, I can say, I've done these competencies, I've mastered these things, and here's the evidence of that. And so I can step in, I can step out much easier. And with Sherri's work on badging and thinking about that too, it's contained. So I can contain it in a way that also allows me to have more mobility in moving with it, so I don't lose what I know and can do, but I'm also able to argue for what I know and can do. So if someone's like, oh, well, that course syllabus doesn't match, it's like, but look at my evidence, and it's here in this record. And that is a completely different conversation on how our students move through and experience their education. And so there's wonderful implications for it. We're rethinking how we're empowering the mobility that's just in our education system, that we don't really do that well. So.
Great. Any last thoughts, any last questions from anyone before I turn it back over to Kelly to do the exit slides here? Popcorn test. All right. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Sherri and Zander and Natasha for being panelists today, and for IMS Global for hosting this webinar. We really appreciate the opportunity to share our information with you. Kelly?
Thanks, everyone. This was a great panel. I won't even pull up my slides. So thank you to the panelists for doing this. I put a link to the event page in the chat because that will be where the recording is posted if you're interested in doing that. We also have information on our next roundtable, which will be happening on December 7th. And that will be a story about the impact of CLR using some key metrics from the University of Central Oklahoma. We'll share their information about retention and things like that that are really crucial to making sure your programs are successful. So thank you to all of the panelists. I appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience with our listeners. Have a great day, everyone.
And vote.